inside a live cell, there is something which is called as the nucleus, and the nucleus is the most important part of the cell because it controls all the activities of the organelles present inside the cell. So, plant cell is covered by cell wall and the animal cell is covered by plasma membrane. All this they found out. Sladen and Skivan were not able to explain how new cells are formed. That credit goes to Rudolf Virchow. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to this session on class 11th Biology for CBSE. I'm Dr. Divya, Biology Faculty, Vidhyaashram School of Excellence, Mysuru. So in this session, let us learn about the topic cell theory under the chapter Cell the Unit of Life. So let's see how the cell theory was put forward, and then let's move on to learning about some of the MCQs that can be framed under this particular topic. So to begin with, we should know what a cell is. So we know that the cell is the fundamental, basic, structural and functional unit of all the living organism, because any living organism you take for that matter, be it a prokaryote which is a unicellular or a eukaryote which is multicellular, all of these are made up of cells, wherein the unicellular are made up of one single cell, and that single cell itself performs all the functions of that particular organism. And prokaryotes, talking about that, it is made up of many number of cells, wherein those group of cells come together to form a tissue. The tissues will form the organ will form the organ system, which is again, when we say organ system, it is nothing but a collection of cells which performs a particular function. So therefore, any living organism as such, if it has to survive or perform its function in a proper way in the environment, then cell activity is very, very important. So therefore, cell is the basic structural and functional unit or fundamental unit of all the living organisms. So unicellular organisms, I told you, they are capable of independent existence because they're just made up of a single cell. Say for example, take the bacteria for example. Bacteria, they are unicellular. So what is the shape of the bacteria? If it is a rod-shaped bacteria, it will just have one single cell wherein the genetic material will be there. It will have the flagella for its mobility and all that. So this single cell, that is, it survives independently on its own. For example, yeast. Yeast is one of the unicellular, though yeast is a eukaryote, it is unicellular. Again, yeast is made up of just one single cell that survives on its own. So therefore, unicellular organisms are capable of existing independently, and that single cell in a unicellular organism performs all the essential functions that are needed in that particular organism. So talking about the cell, so now we know that what is a cell and how exactly did people get to know about the cell. So that credit actually goes to a scientist whose name is Anton von Leeuwenhoek. So Anton von Leeuwenhoek was the first person to have studied a live cell under the microscope. Of course, then the microscope during his time was not that well developed. It was a simple microscopes that they used. So he couldn't find the internal structure of the cell, or internal or inside the cell what all organelles are there, all that he couldn't find out. But he got to know that in all the living organisms there is something called a cell that is present. So that credit goes to Anton von Leeuwenhoek. He was the first scientist who described a cell, that is a live cell. So this can come for MCQ. Next, talking about, so once that is existence of cell to be known throughout the world, it is at that time the cell theory begin to formulate. So there are various scientists who themselves by various works contributed to the formation of cell theory. So let's study each of them one by one. So first let's talk about Robert Brown. So what did I say? Anton von Leeuwenhoek was the first person who studied about the live cell. But he didn't know what was there inside the cell and all that, he didn't know. So it was later on, that is when the invention of the microscope, new microscope started, or advancement of the technology and all started, wherein they started developing compound microscope or a better version of a microscope. It is, or when they started developing the electron microscope, it was then the people got to know what exactly is there inside the cell. And it was at that time one scientist, that is Robert Brown, who got to know that inside a live cell, there is something which is called as the nucleus, and the nucleus is the most important part of the cell because it controls all the activities of the organelles present inside the cell. So, the credit for the discovery of nucleus goes to Robert Brown. So, this was the scientist Robert Brown. So, again to brush up, Anton von Leeuwenhoek discovered a live cell. Inside the live cell, the nucleus was discovered by Robert Brown. So, moving further, again there is one more scientist, that is Matthias Kleeden. So, he is a German botanist, that is a person who studies about plant, and he is from Germany. He, in the year 1838, he examined a large number of plants and he observed that all plants are composed of different types of cells. That is true, right? Because you would have learnt in anatomy of flowering plants. You had that chapter, right? Wherein you had studied the anatomy of the dicot monocot root, the dicot monocot stem, the dicot monocot leaf and all that. So, wherein they are composed of different types of cells. Say for example, in the dicot root itself, if we take, they are made up of, entirely the cortex is made up of parenchymal cells. They have a layer of epidermal cells. Then they have the endodermis, they have the pericycle, wherein in the pericycle there is Casparian thickenings that are found, and there is this xylem that is there, phloem that is there, and the pith region, which is again made up of parenchyma. Or say for example, if you take the example of a dicot leaf, so we have the parenchyma. There itself there are elongated parenchyma cells which are palisade parenchyma. Then there are some of the parenchyma cells which have irregular shape, which are spongy parenchyma. So like that, within the plant cell itself, or they have sclerenchyma, they have chlorenchyma, they have collenchyma. Like this, they have various shapes of cells that are present. So, in a plant cell, there are different types of cells that are present inside the plant cell. So, that discovery, that credit goes to Matthias Kleeden. So, what Matthias Kleeden did was, he examined a large number of plants and he observed that all plants are composed of different kinds of cells, and these cells come together to form a tissue. Say, for example, we have the ground tissue. In the ground tissue, what all is there? Ground tissue consists of parenchyma cells, it consists of sclerenchyma, it can consist of chlorenchyma, collenchyma and all that, right? And talking about the vascular tissue system, we have the xylem and the phloem. So, like that, there are different types of cells that are present in the plant. So, that credit goes to Matthias Kleeden. So, this was the scientist who was a German botanist. So, next, it is about Theodor Schivan. So, Theodor Schivan, he was a British zoologist who studies animals. So, he in the year 1839, he studied different types of animal cells. So, what did he concentrate on? He concentrated of animal cells, and he found that the animal cells are protected by a thin outer layer, and that outer layer is called as the plasma membrane. So, first a live cell was discovered, then inside the live cell a nucleus was discovered, and then in the plant cells, that is plants, they got to know there are different types of cells that are present, and in the animals they got to know that in the animal cells are covered by an external thin layer which is called as the plasma membrane. And also he, apart from studying on animals, he also studied on the plants, and he said that in plants there is presence of cell wall, and this particular characteristic, that is the presence of cell wall, is quite unique to the plant itself because cell wall is absent in animals. So, therefore, what did Theodor Schivan find out? He discovered that animal cells have a thin outer protective layer which is called as the plasma membrane, whereas the plant cell, apart from having a plasma membrane, it also has a cell wall, and that cell wall is not found in the animal cell. So, that credit goes to Theodor Schivan. And on the basis of this, actually, Schivan proposed a hypothesis that all animals and plants are composed of cells and the products of cells. Of course, they are made up of different types of cells and the products of cells. What are the products of cells? They are organelles and all that. So, this is Theodor Schivan, who was a zoologist. So, this was his finding. Next is Kleeden and Schivan, that is two scientists, Kleeden and Schivan. They together, based on all the hypotheses or their findings, they put together the cell theory. So, according to them, what the cell theory says, let us look into. So, the cell theory actually did not explain how new cells were formed. So, So far, supporting cell theory, what all was found out? They found out that the plant cells are made up of, in plants, they have different types of cells that are there, and the cell is covered by cell wall, and the animal cell is covered by plasma membrane. All this they found out. So that information, though it is correct, it was not sufficient to prove the cell theory. So there was a drawback in that cell theory. So what was the drawback? That drawback was that in the cell theory, none of the scientists were able to explain how new cells are formed. Of course, we know that the cells divide, right? So during the division of cells, from where exactly the cells divide? What is the basis for the division? So from where the new cells are formed, all that information was not available. So therefore, the cell theory could not be formulated in a proper way. And it was at that time one more scientist, that is Rudolf Virchow. So Rudolf Virchow, in the year 1855, what he did was, he was the first person who explained that cells divide and new cells are formed from pre-existing cells. Meaning, cells are already there. So what happens? Cells are already there. From this cell, the cells divide to form two daughter cells. These will divide to form again two daughter cells each. These again will divide like this. So that is how the cells multiply and divide. So that is what. So from the pre-existing, so this is the pre-existing here. This becomes the pre-existing because it is this that is undergoing division. Next, this becomes the pre-existing. So whatever new cells are formed during the division process, all that is from the division of the pre-existing cell. So that is what they found out. And that term is called as omnis cellula e cellula. This term is very important because it can come for the MCQ. So this term omnis cellula e cellula, this term was given by Rudolf Virchow. And what it means? It means that the newly formed cells are developed from the pre-existing cells itself. And therefore, whatever cell theory was put forward earlier, he modified the hypothesis. Whatever Schleiden and Skivan, they put some hypothesis, right, regarding the cell theory, but there was a loophole there. So he modified that, and he was the first person to give a final shape to the cell theory. Though the cell theory definitions were started or stated first by Schleiden and Skivan, but still Schleiden and Skivan were not able to tell the world, that is, from where does new cells form. So that they were not able to tell the world. So therefore, their cell theory was not that strong enough. It was then based on their studies, Rudolf Virchow, later on what he did was, he was the first person to say that from the pre-existing cells itself, new cells come or new cells are formed. And based on that, the cell theory was formulated. What is that cell theory? Let's look together. So, today in the present world, whatever cell theory we follow, it is this. So, this contribution is by Schleiden, by Skivan, and also Rudolf Virchow. So, three people also should take that contribution. So, cell theory as understood today is all living organisms are composed of cells and products of cells. So, this sentence, if you remember, it was given by Schleiden and Skivan. Schleiden and Skivan were the one who gave this sentence, that is, the living organisms are composed of cells and the products of cells. And this sentence, that is, all cells arise from pre-existing cells. So, this sentence was given by Rudolf Virchow. So, therefore, these three scientists, they actually framed the cell theory or contributed for the development of the cell theory. So, this is the cell theory. So, this is the first topic in this particular chapter. So, now let's see in what way MCQs can be formed under this particular topic. So, the first one, a live cell was first described by Robert Brown, Anton von Leeuwenhoek, Matthias Schleiden, Theodor Skivan. So, it's not Robert Brown, it's Anton von Leeuwenhoek because he was the first scientist to look at a live cell under the simple microscope, and he was the first person to discover it. Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Skivan, they have something to do with the study of the animal and the plants. Next question. Robert Brown discovered. So, Robert Brown discovered Golgi bodies. No, Golgi bodies was discovered by Camillo Golgi. Plasma membrane, no. Nucleus, no. No, nucleus is the right answer because nucleus was discovered by Robert Brown because we had studied, right, once the advent of the electron microscope was done, that is when they discovered the nucleus. That is Robert Brown discovered the nucleus. So the right answer is option C, nucleus. Next question. Which statement is incorrect? So a set of statements are given here. We have to find which is the wrong one. So Robert Brown discovered cell. Schleiden and Skivan formulated the cell theory. Virchow explained that cells are formed from pre-explained cells or pre-existing cells. A unicellular organism carries out its life activities within a single cell. So here Robert Brown discovered cell. That statement is wrong because Robert Brown discovered nucleus. Cell was discovered by Anton von Leeuwenhoek. So therefore, what is the question? Which statement is incorrect? So this option is right here, option A, because this statement is incorrect. Schleiden and Skivan, of course, they contributed to the formation of cell theory, wherein they stated that all the organisms are made up of cell and their components. So that is how. So Virchow also gave statement or contributed to cell theory, and unicellular organism carries out its life activity within a single cell. Yes, because I told you in the first slide itself, wherein unicellular organism is made up of a single cell and all the activities of that particular organism takes place within that single cell itself. So therefore, since all these statements are correct, answer A is the right option because that is a wrong statement here. Moving to the next question. New cells generate from dash fermentation of bacteria, regeneration of old cells, pre-existing cells, dead cells. Fermentation of bacteria, yes, earlier and all, before the advent of the microscope and all that, some hypotheses were put forward. That is, new organisms generate from the dead, they generate by the fermentation of bacteria and all that. But that is actually wrong because new cells do not generate from fermentation of bacteria. They do not regenerate from the old cells. No, old cells, they don't regenerate as new cells. No, that will not happen. They do not come from the dead cells also, but they come from the pre-existing cell, wherein the division of those pre-existing cells will take place. So that is how they are formed. So option C is the right answer here, and the statement was given by Rudolf Virchow. It was given by Rudolf Virchow. And Rudolf Virchow also used a word. What is it? Omnis cellula is cellula. That you have to remember. It is important. Next question. Which of these is the correct findings of Theodor Skivan? Animal cells have a thin outer layer called plant membrane. Plants and animal cells are made up of cells and their products, all of the above. All of the above is correct because animal cells have a thin outer layer which is called as the plasma membrane. Plant cells, they have a cell wall. Plants and animal cells are made up of cells and their products. All these are true. So therefore, all of the above. So animal cells, yes, they have a plasma membrane, but they do not have a cell wall. That you have to remember. Plant cells, they have a cell wall and a plasma membrane, and plants and animal cells are made up of different types of cells and their products. So all the statements are given by Theodor Skivan. So all these are the right answers. Therefore, option D is the right option here. Next question. Cell theory was formulated by Theodor Skivan, Matthias Schleiden, Robert Brown, both A and B. So the option can be both A and B because Robert Brown actually discovered the nucleus. He didn't give a hypothesis or didn't contribute to the formation of the cell theory, but cell theory was formulated by Theodor Skivan as well as Matthias Schleiden, both of them. Therefore, both A and B, option D is the right answer. Both A and B is the right answer. Option D. Next, which of these is the statement of Virchow? That is Rudolf Virchow. What is the statement? New cells arise from dead cells. Cells arise from pre-existing cells. Nucleus divides to form new cells. None of the above. The option right one here is cells arise from pre-existing cells. So this is option B is the right answer. Next, the cell theory hypothesis of Schleiden and Skivan was modified by. So Schleiden and Skivan had put forth a cell theory, but there was a loophole, there was a drawback in that, and that drawback was that Schleiden and Skivan were not able to explain how new cells are formed. That credit goes to Rudolf Virchow. So therefore, Rudolf Virchow was the one who actually modified the cell theory that was put forward by Schleiden and Skivan. So the answer is option C here. Next, dash is the fundamental structural and functional unit of an organism. Nucleus, cell, mitochondria, chromosome. So, cell is the fundamental structural and functional unit of an organism, because without a cell, none of the organism can exist. Option B, because the first definition in the slide itself was this. So, you have to remember this. So, option B, cell is the right answer here. So, this was about this session wherein we learnt about the cell theory, how exactly the cell theory came into existence, and how, though not directly, some of the scientists contributed to the cell theory, but right from the beginning of the discovery of the cell itself, it led to the contribution of the cell theory. So, how did the cell theory come into existence, and what are the statements of the cell theory? All that we got to know, and also we learnt about some of the MCQs under this particular topic. So, I hope you understood this session well. So, we shall meet again in the coming session, taking up a new topic under this particular chapter and discuss the MCQs under it. So, see you in the next session. Thank you.